I spent the day at the White House last week as part of one of the first new and alternative media press days hosted by the Trump administration. Influencers, YouTubers, independent commentators, and even podcasters like me were invited to give interviews and questions. You may have seen my question to Karoline Leavitt doing the rounds, which Helen Lewis at The Atlantic later described as straight from North Korea. But what really happened? In this video, we will take you through my experiences there for a behind-the-scenes look. You'll see how the White House play with the mainstream media. You'll see my interviews with members of the administration, including ever-spicy Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. But perhaps most interesting was my chat with the man behind Trump's media team, explaining how they concoct their publicity stunts and how the White House media machine really works, and how it was different from what the Biden administration were doing. Let's start with my initial reactions on the day, and forgive me as I look a tad disheveled on the White House lawn. I'm in the middle of a quite surreal day in Washington, D.C. You'll see behind me the White House, and here on my left is the famous West Wing. I came over thinking I would have an interview with Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, which I did a hell of a lot of preparation for. And only at the last minute, the Secretary had to pull out. I think he had better things to do than talk to an unemployed banjo player from Britain. I've just come out of what one might describe as sort of blind speed dating with various cabinet members and members of the Trump administration. I wasn't really given much warning beforehand about who I would be interviewing, and it included Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Secretary of Housing Scott Turner, Tammy Bruce from the State Department, and then whisked away to the conference room with Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. I got to ask her a couple of questions about Britain. From here now, I'm off to interview Senior Advisor for Counterterrorism, Dr. Seb Gorka. There's a bit of a hullabaloo about all of these posters, which initially from behind I thought were hostage posters relevant to Israel, but since we got closer, we could see that this is individual deportees of the 100,000 odd deported in the first 100 days of President Trump's second term. When it comes to deportations, the mainstream media had been focusing their attention on specific contentious cases, perhaps most famously the controversy surrounding the deportation of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, an El Salvadorian national living illegally in Maryland with alleged affiliation to the criminal MS-13 gang. The Trump administration wanted them talking about something else, specifically the number of deportees and the decrease in border crossings since his inauguration. Here's legacy media MSNBC reporting on the story.
White House has put up about 100 posters of what they say are unauthorized immigrants who have been arrested for violent crimes. But what's particularly noteworthy about this location is it is right directly behind the positions where TV correspondents do their hits from the White House lawn. So therefore, no matter what network you're on, that includes MSNBC, if you're doing a hit from the White House right now, those pictures will be behind you.
To which the White House X account replied, chess, not checkers. Why? Well, the White House, it seemed, had succeeded in getting the mainstream media talking about the deportees. Throughout the morning, we watched as the story climbed the trending charts, with the reluctant mainstream media having to explain the placards. Now let's get more context into exactly how the media reported on this story. Left-leaning Alternet ran the headline, "Heads on Pikes. Trump White House accused of vaguely fascist display." Now let's use Ground News to see how the rest of the media is covering this story. We specifically partner with Ground News because their app and website allow me and my team to quickly cut through media bias and get the full picture on any news story. There are multiple articles published on the mugshot posters of arrested illegal immigrants on the White House lawn, and we can access every single one on Ground News with context on each source. Interestingly, only 17% of left-leaning outlets are covering this story. Meanwhile, right-leaning The Spectator ran the headline, "The Trump White House is government by meme," a very different narrative from Alternet. Seeing all sides regardless of political lean is essential for making informed decisions and spotting bias. That's why Ground News' blind spot feed, which highlights stories underreported by either side, is such a powerful tool. I genuinely believe in what Ground News is doing, and I encourage you to check it out by scanning the QR code or visiting ground.news/Winston. If you subscribe through my link, you'll get 40% off unlimited access. Ground News is subscriber funded, and by supporting my sponsors, you are supporting this show. But back to the White House. We were taken up to the Indian Treaty Room near the Doge offices and right by a pandemic preparedness office of the Eisenhower building. Our room happened to be the first room that a live television press conference was given in 1955 by then President Eisenhower, a fitting venue then for the new media of 2025. And there began the somewhat awkward parents' evening-style interview sessions. Now here's the brains behind the Trump media machine, Keelan Dorr, explaining how it operates in the offices of the White House. What's kind of remarkable as I walked through the gates, through security, and I see all these posters of the deportees.
We rolled that up for you today.
So you are actually, frustrated as you might be of the mainstream media, you're kind of masters of media. You've completely, and we've been watching this on X as we've been sat here. That's what everyone's talking about all over the world is because you've got the mainstream media talking about these things.
Well, what's crazy is, so I want to say a few things in response to this. One, thank you.
Yeah,
we're very excited.
Is it you?
There's some guys on my team. We all came together with this idea. We perfected it, and we were out at like 10 p.m. last night, putting these signs on the ground late. We have not once. So in regards to new media, I have not once told an outlet what to say, what to ask. I've maybe never given them talking points or like walked them through an issue, right? Before it hit. And so what I find to be really impactful is we're simply putting people in a position to ask questions, and what we're doing is popular. What we're doing is transparent, and it makes for not only good content, but it's very informative. And so, we're masters of media. We just understand the value of a good image.
Now, it was my impression that bringing alternative media and influencers into the White House was new to the Trump administration. In March, they launched Podcast Row. These past weeks have seen the likes of independent commentators such as Tim Pool invited into the briefing room, and my visit was day one of a 3-day stretch, including various other independent voices from new media. Trump did bring new media into the White House in his first term, but believe it or not, it was actually President Biden who turbocharged such efforts, but more on that in a moment. Now, here's a snippet of my interview with Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. I should note she has quite a history with British journos.
Anybody else?
Should the Defence Secretary...
What country are you... Wait, what country are you from?
The UK.
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting. Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
What about Jewish space lasers? Tell us about Jewish space
No,
lasers.
why don't you go talk about Jewish space lasers? And really, why don't you off? How about that?
Which, of course, I would be remiss not to mention. I'm from London, and I should say, I know you've had quite some trouble with some British journalists.
Yeah, they're a bunch of assholes.
They are
Not
a bunch
all
of
of them,
arseholes. No, it might be all of them. Now, when interviewing Marjorie Taylor Greene, you never know what to expect. I certainly didn't expect a prop. Perhaps we can start with the thing that's in the news at the moment, which is the deportations. I'm sure as you walked here to speak with me, you would have seen all of the signs of the most recent individuals to be deported.
Right.
Well, what's your initial take on it?
Well, I'll tell you what my initial take is. I brought this lovely board because I'm so thrilled with these numbers. This is from March. This is simply apprehensions at the border. March of last year under Biden and Democrats' wide open border policies. And this is March this year. Now, Democrats used to constantly lie and claim that it was a funding issue is why they could not secure the border. But it's simply the matter of an election.
Well, seeing as we're talking about numbers, if you actually look at the numbers, so far, I believe it's about 117,000 have been deported.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Biden in the calendar year 2024, his number was 685,000 deported, which means that actually at this rate, the Trump administration is underperforming compared to Biden in 2024. Not only that, if it is indeed true, that the vice president says there's 25 million illegals in America, this isn't going to put a dent on that.
Well, here's what the Trump administration is facing. They're facing radical rogue judges that are actually, I would say they're committing treason against the United States of America.
If you want to watch my full interview of her, please head to winstonmarshall.co.uk, where we further discuss the border as well as Doge and the truth about the Elon Musk versus Scott Bessent feud. But I also got to ask her about the Epstein files. Check this out. You recently tweeted, or posted on X, I should say, about Virginia Giuffre, who sadly committed suicide, and she was a victim of, or an alleged victim of Epstein. And under this, I think you called that the Epstein files must be released. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, said she would release the files. This was maybe a month or so ago. And the next day, they didn't release the files. They released a folder that purported to be the files, but when you open it, there was nothing new in there. Are you disappointed by her just failure there?
Listen, here's how I feel about that issue. I don't think it's just the United States government that needs to release information about Jeffrey Epstein. I think there's other governments that need to release.
Which governments?
Probably many of our allies. I bet your country, the UK, has information on him. He clearly had Prince Andrew. I would say Israel probably has information on him. I would say there's many countries that have information they should release also on the Epstein files, because women should have never been trafficked and should have never been held captive and be used by the intelligence community of many countries.
So
that's my opinion.
Yes.
And that's just what I think about it. And that's what most Americans think about it. They're sick and tired of governments, our government and other governments, creating foreign wars, creating situations like this where people are compromised in order to control people.
So you do believe he's an intelligence
there's
asset?
victims. There's real victims of this. And Virginia Giuffre was one of them. And her death is tragic. And the women that have come forward are heroic. But she also tweeted she wasn't suicidal.
Yes.
And I think that has to be mentioned.
So you do think that Epstein was an intelligence asset?
Absolutely. I think he was an intelligence asset. I think everybody knows that. No one of any intelligence believes he did all that by himself.
Okay, so your response is all of these countries, as well as America, should release the information.
Whoever has information should release the information.
We also interviewed Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Scott Turner, and spokesperson for the Department of State, Tammy Bruce. You can see all the interviews on our Substack, winstonmarshall.co.uk. After the interviews, I was ushered away into Biden's makeshift film set of the White House, which was in the White House, which you might remember from...
I get my booster shot.
And that room has now been converted into a press room. Wedged between influencer Aaron Wexler and former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer, I asked Karoline Leavitt 2 questions, all of which I discussed on last week's video, which I will link to at the end. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive, and I was invited to discuss it on Fox Unheard, Dan Wootton's Outspoken, and Newsmax. Of course, not everyone was so pleased. Helen Lewis, a journalist you might remember from an interview with Jordan Peterson some years ago, wrote up her take of the influencer's invasion of the White House. Lewis wrote that I was showboating and asked a, quote, absolute non-question and joked about asylum for banjo players, which, to be honest, I found quite funny. But I note 2 things which came to mind when reading her piece. Firstly, she ignored my first question about the British trade deal, a serious question about whether or not free speech would be a component of the US-UK deal, one which has not been asked by the mainstream media, but was asked yesterday when Trump and Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer announced their new deal.
Part of the agreement would depend on whether the UK would respect free speech and freedom of religion. I know the VP is really interested in that, talked about that earlier this year. Was there any assurances that you guys got on that front?
You want to handle that?
Yeah, that was not part of the conversation. Our conversation was an economic conversation from start to finish.
She also does not mention that the mainstream media were there as well. They were there also interviewing various members of the administration. This was for all media, not just alternative media. But perhaps most glaring of all, I thought, as I read her piece, that was Helen Lewis's criticism when Dylan Mulvaney interviewed President Biden.
This is my 221st day of publicly transitioning.
God love you.
Where was Helen Lewis's scathing words when pop singer and apparently vaccine expert Olivia Rodrigo was speaking from the White House rostrum?
I'm in awe of the work President Biden and Dr. Fauci have done, encouraging all communities to get vaccinated.
Where was Helen Lewis when podcaster Jay Shetty gave this interview to President Biden?
It's incredible, isn't it, how a challenge that you're going through actually helps you become more compassionate and empathetic towards other people.
It's kind of human nature for most people.
Where was Helen Lewis when James Corden did whatever this is?
Mr. President.
Well, how are you?
I'm very well, so good to see you. Really want to be of service. And the job that I think is for me is to be your assistant.
Where was Helen Lewis when Forbes reported in March 2022 that during the height of the virus outbreak, President Joe Biden's administration authorized $1,000 cash payments to create a TikTok influencers army as part of the campaign to get people vaccinated? My point being that when it's Trump, it's literally North Korea. But when it's the Democrats, it's crickets. I also know that at no point, either in my interviews or in the briefing room, was I ever told what I could not ask about. I was never told what I should ask about. I was never told what issues were out of bounds. And given that, I think it's a tad bit of a stretch to liken it to North Korea. Now, having said that, and to be fair to Helen Lewis, There was a variety of new media people like myself invited in, and there was a broad range in the standard of questioning.
I'm not the headline news girl, I'm the nuts and bolts. I'm the policy type nerd. So what direction do you advise kind of me to go into, like the White House files that y'all send out every single day? Because that's what people are used to when they want to ask me questions. They want to know kind of like the nuts and bolts of everything.
But unlike in the Biden administration, we weren't getting paid. Well, I certainly wasn't. Although I will note that this was the first time that I'd filmed with snipers looking over our shoulders. Is it fair to say there is a media revolution, with new media finally led into the White House? Well, certainly the last presidential election was the podcast election, with Trump's appearances on Joe Rogan and elsewhere playing a big part in his victory. But on the other hand, Biden was doing something similar, although I'd say far more artificial and far more ridiculous.
Are we topless at the White House?
But Biden might have been ahead of the ball in the alternative media space. Did you know he actually had a podcast himself? A weekly conversation? The wildly unwatched show, which I recommend to anyone struggling to sleep at night. As for my day at the White House, the young guys running the new media operation are smart and savvy. Trump doesn't know just how to play the mainstream corporate media. He also seems to be a maestro of the alternative media space. Maybe it wasn't just the legacy media who got played. Maybe I did too. Thanks for watching the Winston Marshall Show. And remember, if you want to support the show, all you have to do is press subscribe, like, and comment. Let me know what you think. Head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk for exclusive content videos and interviews. And until next time, be well.